And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Zehngut. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive. I run the OC WordPress Meetup. These days I run the General Meetup, and I co-host with my wife for the business track for this meetup. We're currently running 5 meetups out of this room now. 6 meetups out of this room now every month. This is the business track, which meets on the 3rd Monday of the month. The 4th Monday of the month is the general WordPress meetup, where we talk about uses of WordPress, plugins, themes, that kind of stuff. The 1st Monday of the month is the design meetup, which is run by Sarah Weefald. And then the 2nd Monday of the month is the developer meetup, which is run by Brandon and Jeff at Pixel Jar. On the 3rd Wednesday of the month is Women Who WP, which no longer meet in Fountain Valley. They're going to meet here in this room, and they do dinner as well at that meeting. That's included, so they'll do that out of this room as well. And then I also have the OC Shopify Meetup, which we just had our 2nd meetup, which is the 2nd Tuesday of the month. So that was last week. That's going really well. Any questions on meetups? Yeah.
I'll be speaking this Wednesday on the Woman Who.
Excellent. Excellent. Good.
Selling your services to seniors is the subject.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. Excellent topic. So come and see that. It is called Women Who WP, but that doesn't mean you can't go if you're not a woman. So anybody's welcome to go to that meetup. This particular meetup, we really talk more about business topics. We don't talk about developing WordPress or using WordPress, even though it is associated with the WordPress group. But this meetup this night is dedicated to business topics, and we've had some really great topics here so far. On the WordPress front, the last WordCamp was in Phoenix, which was this past weekend, which I attended. The next upcoming WordCamp in our area is San Diego. What's the date on San Diego? Do you know? March, actually April. When are we in?
It's 17th through 15th through 17th.
Thank you.
14th to 15th, sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We can't be there this year. We're going to be to Hawaii, and that trumps San Diego. So that's what we're doing. And then recently announced is WordCamp Orange County is coming up on June 9th and 10th. So our website just went live today, or at least our splash site. We're still working on the final design, but we do have a call for sponsors and some blog posts that are up. One of the things that I do want to announce is for our 4th year, we've got the Plugin-a-Palooza competition. So Plugin-a-Palooza is a thing we do on Sunday afternoon at WordCamp. We have made some changes this year. We have a new host for this year. It's going to be a little bit shorter. In the past, it was a little too long, so it's going to be an hour and a half instead of 2.5 hours. But at that on that Sunday, what we do is the people who built a plugin present the plugin to the crowd. The judges critique the plugin. They ask questions to the developer about the plugin, and then we award prizes for the top 3 plugins for the people who competed. Last year's first prize was $500, sponsored by Security. This year's first prize is $3,000.
Wow. So
we've gone 6 times the amount of the prize. And so if you are interested in that, I encourage you to apply soon. We're taking up to 10 teams for Plugin-a-Palooza this year. So first prize is $3,000, second prize is $1,500, and third prize is $500. So we've upped the game this year, so it's going to be a really great competition. And it will be hosted by Jeff Turner. So we're looking forward to that. Any questions on WordCamp or the upcoming WordCamps? All right. So tonight, I thought I would do my presentation that I gave at WordCamp Phoenix. And so my topic at WordCamp Phoenix, I was the keynote, or at least I was the self-appointed keynote at WordCamp Phoenix. I wasn't really the keynote. I just happened to go first on Friday, which I think automatically makes me the keynote, right? Mike says yes, so it's a yes. And so I was going to give that presentation tonight. And the way I give my presentations, if you've never seen me give a WordCamp talk, is please interrupt me, ask questions. Especially in this setting, if there's anything you want to discuss as I'm going through this, please feel free to just jump right in and we can discuss these things. Sound good? All right, any questions, anything else before I get started here? All right. So this is running a successful WordPress agency. Keyword being successful. Not everybody not everybody takes that into account when they're starting a WordPress agency. So show of hands, who has a WordPress agency? Development, design, content. You have a WordPress agency?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's called Zehngut.
Okay, great. Freelancers? Everybody else freelancing? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to start out by giving you a very complex algorithm. I don't mean to get too much into development, but let's talk about this algorithm. And it's a really tough one. Communication equals profit. I know the equal sign throws some people off, so that's really tough to comprehend. But point here is that the more you communicate, the more money you make. It's really simple. And I know this because we inherit a lot of our projects from other agencies that have not communicated or have dropped the ball. And when I get a call from a new prospect and they're looking to switch agencies, usually the conversation is about the other agency just didn't respond. They didn't answer my calls. They didn't answer my emails. It wasn't that they did bad work. Sometimes it is. And once we get under the hood, you know, that's sometimes the case. But usually the complaint that we hear about other agencies is that they just didn't communicate. And so if you want to get ahead in this business, it's really simple. Answer your phone. Return phone calls. Return emails in a timely fashion, right? Communicate with your clients. And the way I like to communicate with my clients, and I don't know if you were here, was it last month when we had Chris Lemma here, or was it the month before?
Last month.
Last month we talked about storytelling. Hi, how are you? What's going on? Good. And so one of the ways I like to communicate with my clients, or what I like to think about communication is, with your clients, tell them what you're going to do at the start of the engagement. During the engagement, tell them what you're doing, and then after the engagement, tell them what you did. You cannot over-communicate. I dare you to try. It's impossible. The more you communicate, the more money you make, and that will be a running thread throughout this presentation. Make sense? Okay. I ask a lot of questions. Everybody, you recognize the slide? I use a lot of movie photos in my presentations. So I ask a lot of questions. Mike, I thought I asked a lot of questions until I met Mike. Mike asks 10 times as many questions as I do on a daily basis, and that's good because the more questions you ask, the more you learn about what your client's needs are. The more you learn about what's on the other side of the table, right? And that's what asking questions is all about. Right, and ultimately that's what being a good partner is for my clients. So I ask all kinds of questions, and because we really want to understand what the business purpose is behind a particular request that we're getting from our clients. And the only way you get that is by asking a lot of questions. If you're asking too many questions, your client will tell you. So ask questions until you get some pushback. And we don't get that pushback very often. We have sometimes that happens. They just don't want to be bothered. But ultimately, the more questions you're asking, the more your client feels like you care about them, because you do. So some of the questions I like to ask, got a couple of examples here. At the start of an engagement, I like to ask, and I think this is a very important question: what is the process for getting paid? That's a really simple question, but you've got to learn a lot from that question. You're not asking, are you going to pay me? How do I get paid? You're already making that assumption. What's the process for getting paid? Right? You'll find out, is there paperwork that I need to know about? Right? What are the terms? Is it net 15, net 30, net 60, net 90? Right? Don't make those assumptions. Ask about the process. You're also going to learn about who pays you. And so that's a key question. And if you don't ask about the process and you make that assumption, you may be in for a surprise when you go to bill. So you really want to understand what that looks like up front. If there is paperwork to be done, you want to understand what that paperwork looks like and make sure you get it filled out so that when you send an invoice, there's no resistance on that invoice. So that's a key question I like to ask up front. Another key question I like to ask is, how will you measure my success? How will my success be measured? What's that measuring stick look like? And again, you may make assumptions as to what your success looks like, right? We all have a different assumption in our head of what success looks like. For me, it's clean code, right? It's a well-running website. That may not matter to my client. That may not matter on the other side of the table. Frankly, they may not give a shit about how clean your code is, right? Or what the design is. They may just care about if they're making sales, or if they're saving money, right? Or if the site does something that's integral to their business. So ask that question. Again, you're going to learn a lot. Don't make that assumption. And if you ask that question and you understand how your success is going to be measured, follow up on it. Now you've got that measuring stick. Follow up during the engagement, follow up after the engagement, based on what they told you that measuring stick was going to be. During the engagement, I like to find out how we're doing by asking this question. I know this is complicated. How are we doing? And they'll tell you. Your clients aren't shy. They're paying for the engagement. They'll tell you how you're doing. If you're not getting that feedback, ask the question. And the silence, when my client goes silent, that's when I worry, right? So that's when I start to ask those questions. But I ask those questions anyway. I want to know how we're doing. Because I want to give the client an opportunity to tell us if we're screwing up. Because if they tell me I'm screwing up, then we're going to do something about it. But if I don't ask the question, those feelings are going to fester, that it's just going to go on, and then I'm probably going to lose that client at some point. Another question I ask, and listen to how I ask this question. Are we exceeding your expectations? Right? I didn't ask, are we meeting your expectations? I'm anchoring on exceeding. Right? I'm making the assumption that we're already meeting your expectations. I want to see if we're beating your expectations. So that's a good question to ask, because if you're not even meeting their expectations, they're going to tell you, right? But make the assumption that that you're exceeding the expectations. So that's how I like to ask that question. Are you happy with the progress? Right? And again, I'm using key words here, right? Happy. I'm just making the assumption. I'm using the assumptive clause. Are you happy with our progress? Right? I'm not asking, are you frustrated? I'm making the assumption that you're happy. After the engagement, I like to ask, is there anything that we could have done differently? Right? And again, I'm not asking, is there anything you were upset with or unhappy with? Just saying if there's anything we could have done differently. And if there is something they were upset with, they're going to tell you. Here's a question I like to ask. Are there other people you know who might benefit from our services? Right? You're asking for referrals, but you're also asking, are you even willing to refer me? Did I do a good enough job where you're going to refer me to your friends? Right? But again, I'm making that assumption, and those are good questions to ask. Any thoughts? Questions?
Well, I think communication.
I was hoping somebody got to ask questions. Go ahead.
I think communication really is the key, because I have one client that I actually heard from today, and I hadn't spoken to them since I took their account 8 months ago.
Wow.
But I tried to engage with them and stop by and hand deliver reports, which I do monthly. And they were not interested in talking to me or seeing me. They said to send it in an email. And so I had been going through that process of just agonizing over the months. How is everything working out for them? And it's working out fine, but in my mind I agonize. And so today I heard from their marketing manager that they want us to do more work for them. So that relieved me, because if they were unhappy, even though I had never heard from them in months, they probably would not have called, or they would have said something different. So I think communication is really super important, and on both sides though, because, and even if they, but it's hard. I don't know how to break the ice. You know, like if you have clients that don't want to talk to you, but they just pay you, and everything is fine, but they don't really want to talk to you.
You know, I think the other thing too to remember about communication is that communication and asking questions and all the things that you're having conversations with have to be within the parameters of what makes sense for that business owner or that executive that you're referring to. So for example, if you came to my office every month with your report, that would make me insane. And I'll tell you why it would make me insane, because then I have to go outside of my schedule and go down and meet you, because I wouldn't expect that you just leave it there.
Do you mean if he came by unannounced?
That's right,
Okay.
exactly. So, yeah, good point. And so I think that it's important, going back to what Steve had originally said, is when you're asking questions and you're setting up that expectation with them from the very beginning when you're first discussing, I think to ask them and say, how would you like to communicate best?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question that I get asked a lot on as a business, somebody who has a lot of vendors. On my side, I get the question, how do you like email? Do you want me to set up monthly meetings with you? Do you want in person? Do you like conference call? And therefore, I can structure what makes sense for me. So, for example, right now, a lame example is that unfortunately we're looking for a new coffee vendor. I know this is a ridiculous thing, but that's what VP of Ops does, along with everything else. And so I've got like these 20 people who are vying for my company's business, and it's a significant amount. We have a lot of employees. And so this gentleman keeps calling me every 2 days. And I've asked him not to do it. I've said to him, listen, we're not in a stage of making a decision. We're just getting proposals out. And yet he continues to do it. So he's outside my parameters. And of course, because I have a direct phone line, he's calling every 2 days. And so I have now moved his proposal to the bottom of the stack. He will not be getting my business.
Surprised you didn't shred it.
So, needless to say, I think it's also important with communication, to the point that you were making, to set the expectation and understand that the communication, whereas it's certainly two-sided, you as I believe a service provider, whether it's a product or a service or whatever you're providing, the communication strategy should be around what makes sense for the customer, because it could be very different for everyone.
And you might want to set that expectation by saying, hey, here's what I like to do with my clients. I like to check in once a month. I like to provide a report.
That's what I did.
Right? Are you available? But the question is, are you available for that on a monthly basis? Right? And if so, how do you prefer that I communicate that to you? That way you're giving them the opportunity to say it, like Sam said. Either they say face-to-face, phone call, email, or no,
Just
I don't want it.
And then the next question you could ask is, let's say you were to ask me that, is it okay if I come by, or is, however you phrased it as what your normal process is, and I say, no, I would prefer via email, or I would prefer via fax, or whatever my preferred method is. Then the next follow-up question you want is, in addition to that, how can I ensure that the service I'm providing you is at the level, is exceeding expectations? So if I've changed your communication pattern, meaning what you would normally do, and you're willing to manage that, then you have to follow it up with, how do I ensure that I'm doing a good job? Because what you've just experienced would drive me nuts as a business owner, to wait for someone to say, now I want more service to know if you're doing a good job.
Oh yeah, I've called, I started out initially, like I do with everybody, I tried to talk and ask questions, and I tried to build a relationship. But then it became basically, how do you want the money? And this time of year is really not a good time for us to get together.
Okay.
And they never would, I would talk to someone, but it would be, I'm sorry, we've always been so busy, da-da-da-da. Months go by, and even the person that called me today, I tried to talk to and communicate with over the months, but they're always unavailable and they never return your call.
Sure.
And, but today, they want something. And it just drives me insane, because
You're going to have to adapt,
Yeah.
right? You're doing something right because they're ordering more business from you,
Right.
right? So you're going to have to adapt to their method of communication.
yeah.
Because they're the client. Go ahead, Jamal.
What's your favorite method of communication?
I like email.
Only email?
I'll tell you, I've had 2 vendors recently who have called me, and they've left me messages and said that, provided some sort of overarching reason for their call. And then they followed up with me within I would say 5 to 7 days. And then they followed up with an email, because I very rarely call vendors back. With those 2 vendors in particularly, I actually like people whose communication is unique, meaning that it's not the standard sales call. So a gentleman that I'm meeting with this week is trying to sell me on services, human resources services, which my company actually desperately needs. And he sent me, he called me at the office and then sent me 2 interesting notifications on LinkedIn. The first one was, Samantha, I'd like to get to know you, blah, 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 the standard sales pitch. I didn't respond because I get those all the time. The second LinkedIn notification was, in kind of bold, he said, Samantha, I can offer your company something that no one else can. Respond to me. Literally, it said, respond to me. And I thought, that's kind of cheeky, bold. I appreciate it, but that's my personality.
What if he sent you a FedEx?
A FedEx?
A FedEx.
Like a paper.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would look at it.
Right, you'd open it because it's a FedEx.
Yeah,
If it
that's
was regular
done.
mail, you're just gonna,
Well, I have an assistant that manages the regular mail.
right, but if FedEx stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. If it was sent to me, I'd have to open it.
Any other comments? Because I'm gonna move on to the next one, because I think this is related. So one of the key questions that I didn't mention that I like to ask right up front is, who are the stakeholders? Right? And this is really important and often missed, right? So if you don't understand the stakeholders, if you don't understand who's approving your project all the way up the chain, you could have problems down the road on the project. Some of the questions asked might be, who's my day-to-day contact? Who signs approvals on this project? But most importantly, who signs my check? And ultimately, I want to understand who signs my check, because that's really all I care about. That's the only person I care about pleasing, ultimately, is whoever signs the check. Because that's the ultimate stakeholder.
Now, can I just mention something on that
Yeah.
question? I would be incredibly annoyed if someone asked me who signs my check.
Okay.
I'm just telling you, I would think that's very offensive. In my opinion, I think it's a good question to ask, who's ultimately responsible for ensuring that I'm getting paid, or who should I, send bills to. I think I think you have to read the audience. For some individuals, who actually signs my check, I think could be an appropriate question. That would irk me, because I would then say to somebody, well, Natalie in AP does, but she's not going to sign anything without my approval. That goes into a spinning cycle that I find annoying, but many people might not.
Here's what's important is you also need to understand that stakeholders can change throughout the course of the project, right? And so this is an ongoing question, right? It's not just a question you ask up front, right? You also need to ask this as you are getting approvals during the process, right? As you are submitting invoices. Over the course of a long project, right? We've had projects that have taken a year, right? The whole team can change, right? So stakeholders can move and change. Here's what's important about stakeholders is, once you've established who the stakeholders are on the project, who are the decision influencers, who are the decision makers, once you've identified the stakeholders, if you can, right? If you don't have a structure like Sam's describing, but if you've identified the stakeholders, write it down, put it in your statement of work, have your client sign it. And here's why. Because if you submit something for approval, or you've gotten something approved, and then you get a change back from a stakeholder that you weren't expecting, you can then point to your statement of work and say, I'm happy to do that for you, but that's a scope adjustment. Because we got the necessary approvals based on what you told us. So it's important to agree, to understand, to not only understand who the stakeholders are, but to put it down on paper and get it and basically mutually agreed as to who's signing this. Let me give you a quick story on this before you ask your question. We had a client where we went through about 6-9 months of work. We understood the stakeholders, we wrote it down, it was in our statement of work. We understood the entire approval process, and we understood the process for getting paid. We knew who signed our check, right? So we did all that. We submitted the work, it was approved, and then they came back and said, you know what, our investment firm has requested these changes to the site. Said, great, not a problem. That's going to be a scope adjustment. And they said, whoa, hey, wait. We've got this investment firm that wants these changes. That's excellent. This is our statement of work. This was the process. This was the process for approvals, and this is the process for getting paid. We did all that, right? We're done with that, and now you're asking for these things. This is a new requirement, and here's why. It's because you've introduced a new stakeholder, a whole new company into the process. What was your question?
I think you already answered my question, actually. I stepped in late, so I apologize.
No problem.
But I was just trying to understand at what point in the process you were requesting stakeholders. Is this pre-sales, is this post-sales? Are we talking about the implementation of the software, or are we actually talking about the original sale and nailing down those details?
Yes. Yes to all of it. You want to do it up front. You want to do it even before you write the statement of work. So I do it when it's a new prospect, right? When we're just talking about the sale. So before we even sign the contract, I'm asking about stakeholders. As we're writing the contract and the statement of work, we identify the stakeholders, we put them in there, right? Throughout the process, as we're getting approvals, we ask again about stakeholders. So we're constantly asking that question to find out if there was any changes. Because a change in stakeholders really does constitute a change in scope, or it can.
Something to add on that, so one of my clients that I work with is a creative agency, and there's actually a few different types of stakeholders. So I was working with an art director, the CEO, and the finance team, right, or like finance/marketing team. So and it was a full design and development of a custom WordPress theme. So we would have to work directly with the art director. He would sign off on revisions of the Photoshop mockup. That went through a couple of different revisions. Then we got that signed off by the art director and then the CEO. And then we started development. After development got done, then we hit the marketing team, because the marketing team is going to cross-browser check all of our work. Of course, we're doing it, like my team's doing it in-house, and we're making sure all the quirks are great. But yeah, the marketing team, is going to be so much using it every day, the WordPress. So so they would have to, like, okay, we understand how to implement the SEO plugin. We understand how to, update the page or create a new custom page and whatnot, right? So then they sign off, and then the CEO sign off, and then we have a completed project. And
so you have different stakeholders for each phase.
yeah, for each phase. Yeah, I have
So
different phases. So design, QA server, and then production.
So that can go in your statement of work. The phases can go in your statement of work, as well as the stakeholders
And they
identified
did,
for each phase.
exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that, in enterprise world, right, that's what you're talking about when you have a multiple phase and multiple stakeholders. And I think that's a really important point that you're making, because no matter kind of where you are, unless you're at the executive level, when you have multiple stakeholders in an arrangement, you're not quite sure who really holds the higher value, right? And sometimes those things can get very challenging.
Yeah.
Because I've been in situations where I've had marketing and finance and a variety of team members all feel differently about the questions that Steve had asked. Things like, how do we determine what success looks like? Are we exceeding your expectations? So what you bring up, I think, is a really important point. There can be multiple stakeholders within that same kind of structure.
Well, I had a customer which was a very, very big hotel chain that you all know the name. And their plan or the system is not to give out the names because they change those names every 3 months. Because they want you to start from scratch. They say, oh, that was him. We do this way. And then 3 months later, he changes, and somebody else comes, and they said, oh, we totally did not like purple color. Change it. I said, well, we have signed. He's gone. He's not in the company anymore. So those big companies love to use that trick, I would say, not to tell who is the stakeholder is. So this is very good thing to write it down.
Sure. So next is watch out for red flags, right? This is really easy to say when I'm on the outside, right? So when you're on the outside looking in, right? It's really easy to identify the red flags. And let me tell you how that works. When I'm in the thick of a project, I ignore all the red flags. I still learn this lesson every day, and I will tell my wife, about certain things and certain projects, and she'll look at me like I'm out of my mind. Why am I doing this? Why am I ignoring these red flags? And frankly, when I'm in the middle of a project, I've got blinders on, I've got tunnel vision, right? So it's very easy to ignore red flags when you're in the thick of it, because you're just focused on the deadline. You're focused on getting it done, getting approved. You're focused on that end goal. But it is really important to not only watch for red flags, but pay attention to them and do something about them. So let me give you an example. We had a client. It's a client that I've mentioned here before, but I'm not going to name them by name. Where from the very beginning of the engagement, we had red flags. Before the contract was even signed, before the statement of work was even written, we had red flags. As a prospect, it was hard to get them on the phone. It was hard to get them to return phone calls. Right? When that happens, the sort of golden rule is a leopard can't change the spots, right? And so if you're starting to experience that before you're even engaged with the client, before you're even working, don't expect that to change during the engagement, right? So that's a red flag, and that's it's a red flag that you have to identify and determine whether that's somebody that you can work with. Because once you get into engagement, you're then in a marriage, right? Some engagements are long-term marriages. So that's a red flag that I ignored. Once we got into the engagement, we got into the project, we took it anyway, even though that red flag was there. Again, I had the tunnel vision, I had the blinders on. We got into it. Right away, the client started missing weekly production meetings, right? Rescheduling them, missing them altogether, showing up late. So there was one of the red flags that I tend to look out for or try to watch out for is people being disrespectful of our time, right? Because if they're disrespectful of your time, they don't actually value the engagement, right? After that, we started having failure to deliver assets. So because those deadlines were being missed, we weren't able to make our deadlines. We didn't have the assets we needed to make our deadlines. So the schedule started to get pushed. And it goes on and on and on. I could just keep going. But those are some major red flags on a single engagement, right? Now, no engagement's going to be perfect, right? There's going to be red flags on anything, but some are larger than others. And I just encourage you to pay attention to them. And assuming you have a proper support system in place, do a sanity check, right? Sam is my sanity check, right? Mike is my sanity check. So a lot of times when we're in these engagements, I'll pass things by the two of them to say, this is something I noticed, right? Is this a red flag? Is it something that we need to address? Is it something that's gonna grow bigger, right? Mike does the same thing with me almost on a daily basis, right? So those are things that you should watch out for, and don't ignore them. Right? Doesn't mean that everything's in a deal breaker, just means you need to pay attention to what those red flags are. Because I promise you, if a pattern, if something happens and a pattern is there, it's not going to go away, right? You can't get a client to change their behavior. Trust me, I've tried for 23 years. I've tried with every client. They don't change their behavior. You just need to know. You need to figure out if it's something you can work with.
It's like any relationship, right? The courting period is the best it's gonna get. It's the
true.
best it's gonna get. So if you're having problems then, it's only downhill.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are there times where you have been able to step out and catch a red flag and how do you disengage, I guess, or like when have you successfully disengaged?
Sure.
Or whatever?
I go for a drive,
Mhm.
or I get up from my desk and I go take a walk, or you name it. Anywhere outside of the office is just where I think, right? So I need to actually physically get myself away from the office and do something other than work, just to think about, am I missing something? I think that was your question: is how do I disengage?
I think I meant more like from the customer itself, or like,
So
because it's a choice of whether or not you just tolerate the behavior, or if you cut them off because you haven't been able to.
And I think it's case by case. I think it depends on the behavior, right? If the behavior is something that is actually affecting our bottom line or our timeline or the project, we will address it, right? And we'll the way we like to address things is just address them head on, not in a rude way, but just say, hey, this is something that we're experiencing, right? And it's affecting your project's timeline, or it could affect your project's budget, right? So we'd like to see if there's a way we can work through this together, because it's something that we've noticed, right? The one red flag that I will not tolerate is disrespect. I will not tolerate any client disrespecting any of the people on my team. And that is something that I will address immediately, and I'll say, and that's where I draw the line. And it doesn't happen often. So, anyway, I know this is going to come as a shock, but our industry as a whole, stereotypically, is not known for empathy. We're not an empathetic group, and present company excluded. But the software industry and the tech industry is known for being short or curt or rude or you name it, right? And one of the ways I tend to think about it is engineers think in conditionals, right? We think in if-then statements. I fall into this pattern myself, right? So, unless a client follows certain rules exactly, right? Then I tend to get upset, right? So it's really easy to get emotional if the client doesn't do exactly what you'd expected them to do at any given time, right? And that's an engineer way of thinking. It's a very much if we try to sort of see the world in a very much an if-then statement, right? But clients don't work that way, and so we are not seen as an empathetic industry, and frankly, it's how I've gotten ahead as an agency for 23 years, because we really do try to partner with our clients. We really do try to show some empathy, and we really do care about the success of our clients. And so part of the reason I know this, I know what I'm saying is, like I said earlier, we inherit a lot of our projects from other agencies, right? So we hear the stories of what goes on in other agencies. We hear about not answering phone calls. We hear about not caring. We hear about agencies that don't dig in and understand the business purposes behind the client's requests, right? And so just showing a little bit of empathy will really help you get ahead as an agency or a freelancer. I promise you. And one of the ways to show empathy is just by listening, right? Ultimately, as agencies, as the agencies that I look at that we compete with, there's really not much difference between us all, right? We're all writing decent code, and we do good design, and we're delivering good quality product. What differentiates us, Zeek, I think, is that we just tend to listen, and maybe listen a little bit more than our competitors. And our clients do tell us that. And so when I get a client that's upset on the phone, or when they send an email, one of the first things I like to do is breathe, right? So especially if a client is animated, I pick up the phone, they're animated, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're upset, right? And it's okay. Every client goes through that. One of the first things I do is just breathe, right? So I take out a pad of paper and a pen. I start taking notes. So I can write down what they're saying, and I just breathe through it. I was a runner in high school. I can't run now to save my life. But when I ran, I learned the breathing technique of breathing in my nose and out my mouth. And when somebody is on the phone and they're animated, that's the first thing I do, is I just start my breathing exercises. I write everything down they're saying down on the phone, and I let them talk as long as they need to, right? And I just listen. And when they're done, I look at my notes and I say, okay, this is what I heard you say. And I read back my bullet points on what I heard. And I ask them, did I hear it correctly? Are we on the same page? Right? Is there anything else that I need to add to this? Right? That way they know I was actively listening to what they had to say. Right? One of the other things I like to say is, at the end of the conversation, especially if they're upset, right? Right when they're done, and Mike loves this, I like to say, you know what? You're absolutely right. Even if they're absolutely wrong, right? Even if they're dead wrong, even if they're mad, one of the first things I say is, you're absolutely right. We screwed up. I take full responsibility for that, right? Again, even if I know they're wrong, I tell them they're right. And here's why. Because to them, they're right. That's their truth, right? So in their mind, they're right. All I do is affirm that. Let them know, I heard you. You're absolutely right. We're gonna fix it. We're gonna make it right for you, right? So let me tell you how we're gonna go about that. And just by doing that, just by telling them they're right, I'm automatically empathetic. Whether I am or not, I'm automatically empathetic. It shows them that I heard them. It shows them I agree with them. I care. Again, the list goes on. So that's my technique for how I listen to an upset client. Make sense? If you're not naturally empathetic, fake it till you make it. Act. Because the worst thing you can do is interrupt somebody, not listen, right? Tell them why they're wrong. All these things happen all the time in our industry. They happen every day. And again, I know this because I hear it from our clients that come to us from other agencies. Make sense? So by taking a walk in your client's shoes, showing some empathy, right? And by saying something like, you're absolutely right, it's actually going to force you to be somewhat empathetic, right? Just by putting yourself there, right? It makes you care, right? You're actually putting yourself on the other side of the table so that you can see things from their perspective. You may completely disagree, but if you just say, you know what, you're right, it changes your mindset. It changes your point of view. Any questions? Anything to add?
We just say sometimes that is a little dangerous when you get the clients who are just unreasonable and continuously, and if you, I mean, I would say 90% of the time, and definitely if something you've done is wrong, absolutely cop to it, make it right. But sometimes you have to push back, at least in my experience. In mine, I'm talking more from a marketing perspective,
Sure,
because that's client as opposed to the dev side. But sometimes, you know, people just make crazy asks, and it's like, okay, you are going to waste your money, and you have to like go, in this case, sorry, this is wrong. This is the wrong way to do it. And and obviously you've got to read the client. Some will be very upset to ever hear that they are not perfect.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then usually it's a client you don't want anyway, because it's never going to end. There's always going to be something that goes wrong. So that goes to your red flag. But I would say there are times when you have to go, look, no, sorry, you were wrong about this. And this is why. I heard everything you said, and this is valid, but ultimately it's wrong because of this.
So a different way to say that might be this, right? So everything you said is great, right? And what you are, if I was your client, I'd hear what you said and I'd say, you know what, this guy's got my best interest in mind, right? He doesn't want me to lose money, right? So he's looking out for me, right? But you might say it something along these lines, right? You might say, you know what, I heard you. I heard everything you just said, right? And I understand your passion, right? I understand, you know, why you'd want to do this from a business perspective, right? Let me tell you what my experience is, you know, when dealing with something like this, and why there are other alternatives that you might want to consider, right?
Yeah.
And here's why you want to consider those alternatives, because what you're proposing might be more expensive than these alternatives, right? Ultimately, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, right? You make the decisions. You're right. You're writing the check. It's your money. I'm happy to spend it for you, right? But let me tell you how much you might save a little bit of money with an alternative.
I like it.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not saying anybody's wrong, right? You're saying, and you're not saying anybody's right. You're just saying,
Yep.
I've heard you. Let me present an alternative, and let's make a decision together because we're partners.
I like that approach a lot.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, you can get away with a lot without actually saying the word no. You
Yeah.
can say yes, but, and draw upon your experiences with other customers in similar industries, or this is how we approach the problem, you know, this way.
Yep.
Or you can get away with it doing that way. You know, there are all sorts of ways you can approach that without being offensive or saying no.
Yeah.
Service apps.
I've got a client right now who shall remain nameless, right? That is that doesn't want to spend any more money, right? They spent money with us for a long time, and they're just on hold right now, and that's okay, right? But some of the solutions they're looking at for saving money at this point are wrong, right? They are just plain wrong, right? And so we're getting requests about cost-cutting measures, ways they want to cut corners, right? Things that they want to do from a technology perspective that will ultimately cost them a lot in the long run. They may save them in the short run, but they're going to cost them a lot in the long run. And with every one of those requests, I'll carefully write an email that says, you know what? I've heard your request. I would like to understand a little bit more about your business goal, right? What are you trying to do, right? And when they write back, I'll say, hey, again, I understand what you're trying to do. The way you're going about it is one approach, right? Let me give you an alternative approach, and here's why, in my experience, that might be better for you in the long run, and why you're going to save money down the road. Again, and at the end of it, look, I've presented both cases. It's your decision. You're spending the money. It's your site. It's your product. I built it for you. I'm a work for hire. You make the decisions. All I can do is present the expertise.
Is that a big, like an enterprise size thing, or is it a smaller company?
The one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I think this conversation applies at every level. So, yep.
I think it's a part of like doing it that as a part of offering a service, it's a duty to offer them an alternative which we think is a better solution. And at the end of the day, they're going to take their decision whether they accept it or not. But if they're doing something disastrous, I think it's totally worth it presenting an alternative on how things have worked in the past. Okay, I understand what exactly you're trying to do. I think this might work as an alternative approach, and let them make the decision.
I think the other thing that's important to recognize, regardless if you have a small business or a large enterprise company, that when you're talking about developers and software, the people on the other side of the phone are not experts. They're not subject matter experts. They're looking for someone to tell them how to solve the problem they've come to you with, right? And so in a lot of cases, this idea of walking in someone's shoes is about helping them in their own situation either look better than they are right now, be able to solve a problem for their boss, whatever the circumstances may be. And a lot of times, if you can save them money or provide them alternative solutions, that's an even better scenario. I think it's really important to understand who you're helping and why they've come to you, right? Because that's going to get you in that next step with them.
What a great segue. Everybody in this room is an expert. You're all wizards, right? And here's how I know, right? Because of what Sam just said, right? The people outside this room, the people that don't work in the tech industry, have no idea what we do under the hood, right? They couldn't do it to save their lives, and frankly, they don't want to. They're hiring us for a reason. They're hiring us because we have expertise, development expertise, design expertise, marketing expertise, whatever it is, right? Whatever your expertise is, they're hiring you because that's something that they don't have, right? So don't discount that. You are the expert. It's also important that you don't undervalue yourself, right? Again, you are the expert. And here's what I'm saying is a lot of developers tend to do this, right? There was a problem and I went in and I solved it in 15 minutes. Or I solved it with 2 lines of code, right? So I'm going to bill for 15 minutes. That's undervaluing yourself, right? Because here's the deal. The only way I'm able to solve that problem with 2 lines of code is the 23 years of experience I have leading up to that moment. And that's worth something. So don't discount that. Because they don't. The fact that I'm able to solve problems quickly is valuable. It doesn't mean I spent just a little bit of time so I only get paid a little bit of money. It's valuable. And when I said this at WordCamp Phoenix Somebody in the back of the audience stood up and clapped. She was really excited. She came up to me afterward and she told me a story. She said, "You know what's great about this? And I'm not going to get the story right, but she said there was a story about somebody. There was a nuclear power plant, and the alarm was going off. So somebody came in and they pushed a button and they said that'll be $100,000, right? And they said, but you just pushed a button, right? And the guy said, yeah, but I knew which button to push. And I think that's an important story for what we do, right? We know which button to push because we've got that set of experience, and that is valuable to the outside world. In this room, at these meetups and at a WordCamp, we're all kind of the same, right? And when we're comparing stories, right, we're like, yeah, she did that thing, whatever, no big deal. To the outside world, we're wizards. So don't undervalue that. Don't undersell yourself.
And what happens if you do to the rest of your community?
What happens if you sell yourself short?
Mm-hmm.
You're affecting all of us. So every time you sell yourself short, you affect the entire industry. It makes us a commodity, right? It makes us bid things based on price. And then people start hunting for the lowest price. So while you are the expert and we are all wizards, check your ego at the door, right? So don't take that too far. So it is still important to be humble, because ultimately we have clients on the other side of the table. And so your clients are paying you for a service. They've brought you in as the expert. They do need your service, but they are paying you. And so here's something I like to ask my clients is, how can we make you a hero today? How can we get a win, right? What's going to make you look good to the rest of your team, to the rest of your stakeholders, to your customers, right? So you start to ask questions about your customers' customers, whether they're in a large organization and they've got other stakeholders, or whether they're running a retail website and they've got actual customers, paying customers. Start talking about your clients' customers. Start asking questions about their customers and ask how you can make them a hero. It's going to go a long way to checking your ego at the door. Make sense? One other thing, it's also important that you stay in your lane. So at Zeek, we primarily do website development, mobile app development, and SaaS products. Those are our services. We are primarily developers. We are a full service agency. We have designers. We can do full websites, but people primarily hire us for our strong development talent. That's what we're known for. It's what we do really, really well. And when I get hired on an engagement, I like to ask the questions I've asked and understand what we've been hired for, right? A lot of our clients will bring in their own design resources. And so we identify our lane at the beginning of the engagement and stay in our lane during the engagement. And it's important to do. Because if you start stepping outside of your lane, you may piss somebody off. There may be other partners that are on the engagement with you, and you may be stepping into their territory. And that's no good for anybody involved. So if you do want to step outside of your lane, ask permission to do so first. And so let me give you an example. We've got a large client, we think we've mentioned him here before, called The Blast. So The Blast was a site we built recently. The number 2 guy at TMZ left last year, and he started his own entertainment news site. And we've partnered with that company to build their site. We built it, we maintain it, and we're actively working on it. It's a very large site. They have an ad guy, an ad specialist that handles their ads and their revenue, and that is his responsibility. That's what he does. And so that is his lane. And so we're in our lane, which is development. They also have a designer on staff. That's his lane, right? We have ad expertise. We have design expertise. Those are things that we do. But we only step into those lanes or provide advice in those lanes when we're either asked by the client to do that, or when we've got some expertise that we could add. And when we want to add that expertise, we ask permission. Hey, listen, we've got some ideas for over here. Is it okay if we provide that info? So we ask permission to step outside of our lane, and our clients appreciate that. So I think that's important. Questions on that? Or anything to add? Great. One of the things that I mention in almost every WordCamp talk I ever give is it's very easy as an agency or as a freelancer to be a vendor, right? A vendor bids based on price, based on hours, right? Might come in and bid low to win a job, but vendors are commodities, right? So vendors get picked based on price, and it's very easy to fire a vendor, right? So if you've got a vendor that's not working out, you go and you pick the next vendor because you're picking people based on price. So do your best to elevate yourself to be your client's partner, right? And a partner is somebody who is more on an equal plane, and that's why I sort of draw this analogy. A vendor's down here, and vendors are easy to fire, but a partner is much harder to get rid of. And a partner does the kind of the things that I've been talking about all throughout this presentation. A partner asks a lot of questions. A partner understands the business goals. A partner understands who the customer's customer is, right? A partner understands the stakeholder. A partner gets in and then adds their expertise as to what the right technology decisions are, if that's what you do, or design decisions. Kind of what we talked about. The questions you were asking or the advice you were giving is that of a partner, not a vendor, right? If a vendor got a question about a piece of technology, right? A vendor would just say, okay, I'll install it for you, or I'll build it for you, right? With no thought of their own, right? A partner comes back and says, hey, that's one way to do it, right? Let me give you a different way that might be more cost effective for you, right? And maybe better for you in the long run, or might be more scalable. Pick a business goal, right? A partner makes recommendations based on the business goals because they care and they understand, right, what's on the other side of the table. So that's what a partner does. Because I'm partners with most of my clients, we don't talk about price. Price is never an issue. I don't get any pushback on price. I never get pushback on invoices. We just bill. Because when you're a partner with a client, your last conversation is price, right? Once you've established that trust and you've established that you're not a commodity and it's not easy to fire you, right? They'll pay whatever you want to charge within reason.
Yes.
Make sense? I mentioned one word, and I just want to reiterate it again, and that's trust. So a lot of things that I've talked about so far: communication, asking questions, identifying stakeholders, and identifying business goals. What you're doing with your client over time is establishing trust, right? Now these things I just talked about, you're not going to be able to do in week one of a first engagement with a new prospect, right? They're still getting to know you, you're still establishing trust, but you do need to start to build that trust so that over time you can be a partner. Partnerships don't happen on day one. They happen over time. Some of my clients, we've enjoyed 10-year relationships with them or more. Oops. So, my kids had to teach me this word, but I now understand what it means, right? One of the worst things you can do is go dark on a client. Not return phone calls, not return emails. What the kids these days say is ghosting, right? Don't ghost. And again, this is a very easy way to get ahead of the competition, just by answering your phone calls, being present, right? Making sure you show up to meetings, phone calls. I know this sounds like kind of common sense sort of stuff, but I'm telling you, I'm here to tell you that other agencies and freelancers are not doing this. Other agencies and freelancers go dark, and go dark for long periods of time. That's the opposite way that's the opposite of establishing trust. Does this happen to you with vendors?
Have ghosted me or
Yes.
our companies I've worked for. You know, I think it's unusual. I will say that in the most recent past, I'm a lot more diligent about vendor selection. 10 or 15 years ago, absolutely. You know, I think the situation that comes to mind most frequently is, you know, I won't hear from a vendor and then I'll get a whopping bill. And that's so, like, there's nothing more that's annoying to a finance operation person is that I haven't heard from you in 6 weeks and then you send me like a $10,000 bill. I mean, I just laughed myself all the way to the phone. I mean, that's ridiculous. And so, and I will say something about the comment that Steve made about price. What the kind of customers you want to work with over a period of time understand and value not only just what the service is, but the service you're getting. So from my perspective, I would rather pay more, generally speaking, to get what you pay for. And I would rather pay more for really good service along with what I'm getting than go cheap in a situation. Every time in my career where I've chosen the vendor on price, I've always regretted it. Always. And so I guess what I'm saying is on the other side of it, I too have learned what are the questions to ask? How do you do your communication? What is your structure like? And then certainly 20 years now into operations, I now set very clear expectations with my vendors through that RFP process and say to them, this is what I expect. If you can't do that, don't even send me an offer because I'm not interested in it. And I think you can tell, like I said, you can tell in the courting stages if somebody is on it. If they're not, they'll never get past the initial stage.
You keep skipping right ahead in my presentation. You're like 3 slides ahead.
I've never seen this
I know,
presentation,
but that's
so.
great. Yes, Jamal.
Well, this is getting very, very important. On Yelp pages now, it says usually responds in so many hours or days. So people are also looking at that other than the stars.
That's a great point.
How do they reply? So this Yelp is putting this up.
So let me ask you a question. What's an appropriate response to an email? How long? Yep.
Well, I read it, and if it's something that requires me to do a lot of thinking and work, then it takes a while. But if it's a question, I immediately pick up the phone and call them. So if I get an email, they will get a phone call back in less than
What's an
5
appropriate
minutes.
response
I mean,
time?
I think it varies
If
by
it's a quick
who's asking
question.
and what they're asking about. So
Okay.
in a post-sale standpoint, if it's a product support related question, it goes to the support organization that has a different SLA. That's different.
Okay, 1 second.
Well, ideally it would depend on cultures and people who you're interacting with, but the ideal way which I handle it is respond immediately and acknowledge that I received it, and I'll get back to you within the time.
Great. What's
What he just said.
What he
Respond
said,
immediately
yeah.
and
Respond
acknowledge.
immediately, and then if it like entails more thought, then this entails more thought. Give me a day.
okay?
If it's a bad mail, wait 24 hours.
There's actually no hard and fast rule on this, right? So I think it's up to all of you to establish the expectation for that, right? So, if I ask you the appropriate response time and somebody emails you on a Saturday, does that still apply?
Not if you set the expectation that you're a Monday through Friday shop.
Exactly.
Right.
So you have to set that expectation, and you want to do that at the beginning of the engagement. Say, you know what, we normally respond within 24 hours, business days, right? Whatever it is, right? So, and you can say we're not staffed on the weekend. So if you email us on a Saturday, we're going to get back to you on Monday, right? If you email us on Friday, ooh, what happened there? If you email us on Friday, probably going to get back to you Monday.
Well, let me ask you a question then. I mean, from an IT perspective, if my website is down, I want it up again. So you
That's-
better freaking figure it out.
Well, so that's different. Somebody mentioned SLA. So your service level agreement is going to be different. So
Right.
let's talk about that for a minute. So
Steve is a host.
we're not in the hosting business.
Well, then
right.
you better not on the phone with the host.
Zeke's
then.
not in the hosting business. So we set that expectation to say, hey, right, during normal business hours, we're going to call your host. After hours, here is the process, right? If your website goes down, if there's an emergency, here's how you handle that. Here's who you call, here's who you email, right?
Mhm.
And so we set that expectation.
Because I know you're not suggesting that Zeke doesn't work on the weekends, thank you.
Next.
Yeah.
To his partners, he doesn't work on the weekends. To you, yeah, he's working on the weekends.
So again, I think it's gonna vary by client, but the important thing is that you set that expectation, right? And somebody else mentioned SLA. Whatever your service level agreement requires, you need to meet up to those standards. So let's talk about a couple of, we've talked about sort of clients and agency and project work and things like that. Let's talk about business for a minute. Who enjoys their work? I do, right? This is a fun job. I mean, I wouldn't have done this for 23 years if I wasn't having fun. Right? So this job is rad. It's a blast. I have fun every day. But it's still a business. And so don't forget to make money. And again, I know that sounds like common sense, but it's easy to get carried away in the fact that this is fun, it's challenging, right? We all, especially developers, enjoy challenges, right? So when we get new requests or new requirements from a client, it's easy to ignore those change orders or those scope adjustments because we enjoy those challenges, right? That's how you lose money. And so it is important to take a step back and realize that even though this is a fun business, it's still a business. So run a business. And so make sure you focus on the bottom line and don't take change orders and scope adjustments for granted, right? Make sure you're making a profit, right? Make sure profit is built into every project or every hour or however you bill. It's also easy to get into projects where you're going to lose money. And that's why those red flags are important. So don't take on projects where you're losing money. And like Sam said, when you do that, it affects the industry. It affects the rest of us when you take those money-losing projects, right? Because clients then sort of expect that from developers and designers. And nobody wants that. If you want to add to that?
Well, I think the only thing that I think is important to recognize about profit is that it is the responsibility of the vendor to ensure that they are making profit. Too often, I've had vendors come to me and indicate that something has happened that is out of scope, that they didn't change or do a change order for me, or there wasn't an issue. Not my problem. Sorry, your contract was poorly written. So remember that profit not only is important, obviously, but it's also your responsibility to ensure that you're charging whatever your method is, that you're making money there. It's not my job as the client to ensure you're making money. That's your job as the business person, right? And I think that's an important other side of the coin.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because that has come up often when I've talked to people at WordCamps and at these meetups where developers have gone to the client and said, hey, I didn't budget this appropriately, so I need to charge you.
Right. And that's
I know that's, look, I want to laugh at that too, but that's real. That happens.
I've had at least 5 or 6 people in this community come to me and say, what do I do when I've budgeted poorly and I've made no money on a project? What do I do?
You eat top ramen.
You've lost.
Yeah.
You do better the next time.
It's a learning experience.
That's right.
That's right.
You spent money on a learning
Right,
experience.
exactly.
Are most of your projects fixed fee or time and material?
Both. We do a little bit of both, depending on the engagement, depending on whether we're doing maintenance or an original project. We do both.
I think also with asking questions, you get more clarity about at the beginning of the project, halfway through or 2 months in, the clarity can actually come more about what they're actually trying to do with the client.
And so one way to sort of guarantee your profit is to write as detailed of a scope as possible. Don't skimp on the scoping phase. Take as much time as you need to scope it. Scope it, ask the questions, scope it again, so that you have all the details. And if there are unknowns, identify the unknowns in the scope, so that you can then go back and say, hey, we had some unknowns in the scope. This is what we've discovered throughout the course of the project. It's going to cost this. Would you still like to do it?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fine conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And change orders are really important, right? If you're not doing your change orders, and that's the other thing that's really important as a customer, I don't have any problem with change orders. As long as when I've said to you, this is what I want, that you're not waiting up 3 months to tell me there's a change order now from that. It's incumbent upon you to say, this is a change order. Would you still like to do it? Yes, I would. 99.9% of the time, I totally get it. Not to mention the fact that I think it's also important, this has kind of been my style, whenever I do budgeting for things, I do like 80% budget, especially on software. I do 80% and then I do 20% for change orders because I know there's going to be change orders, right? Because I'm not the expert. I'm telling you what my problem is and I have no idea, what really is underneath the hood, right? So the other thing that's important when you're talking to your customer about budgeting is to help them with that. So if they come to you and say, my budget is $50,000, I would start with about $40,000 worth of work, knowing that they're going to need some buffer room for change order. Because what they've described to you is just the beginning of what the problem is, I assure you.
Guaranteed. That's a fact.
Yeah.
This is my only non-movie slide. Anybody recognize who this is?
Of course. Marcus.
Right. So, so I didn't go to business school. I went to the School of Hard Knocks. It actually wasn't that hard. I didn't get knocked around at all. But I watched. This is the only show I watch religiously. I love The Prophet because he takes some really good business lessons and boils it down to to kind of bite-sized chunks, things that I can understand and digest. But what I also like about him is he knows when to walk away from a bad deal. Does it all the time. And so that's a really cool takeaway from the shows that don't work out. So that's why I like The Prophet. Somebody at WordCamp, when I showed this slide, said, also watch Shark Tank, right? I said, I felt bad, but I said, sure, if you want to be entertained, you can watch Shark Tank. So it probably wasn't my best WordCamp moment, but anyway.
It wasn't very empathetic.
It wasn't very empathetic at all. I was showing my true colors. Diversify, right? So my rule of thumb, and I've learned this the hard way, is if you have a client that is taking up more than 20% of your total business, you're not diversified enough. At that point, I believe that you've got a client that is too big to fail, right? So and there's a lot of things that happen on the client side that are out of your control, right? You might be doing a great job, and they just may have financial trouble, or they may be going through a reorg, or they may go bankrupt, right? Or they may decide that they don't need to do this project anymore, right? It just fell off their radar for whatever reason. There are so many things that are outside of your control, right? Even if you're doing the best job that you're capable of. So if you have a client that is too big to fail, and that happens, it's going to be detrimental to your business. Hang on one second. I hate to ask this. Anybody in this situation, right? They have. Okay, so clients that are more than 20% of your business. Show of hands. What's that?
Been through it.
Okay.
Well, she hired me as an employee and then fired me. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I like to have all my clients, nobody bigger than 20%. Ideally around 10%. That's how I like to diversify, and we're pretty well diversified right now. So we're well diversified. So if any client goes, right, sure it hurts and it's a bruise to my ego, right? But we can still operate as a business.
Do you have a cap of number of clients?
No, that's just based on resources. We take on number of clients. Number of clients isn't really the measure. It's more number of hours that we can fit in, right? Because I can do 20 clients if they're all just part time, small bits of work. But if I've got clients that are taking up more hours than that, then it's really more about resources. So when I think about this, I'm looking at how much of our resources are each of our clients taking. That's what I'm looking at.
How do you work that for a solo practitioner?
What's that?
How do you work that for a solo practitioner?
Well, what do you do?
Developer.
Okay. And so, are you developing one particular thing for one kind of client? I mean, are you that niche?
I don't know. I don't know what I am yet.
Okay.
So.
That's what I would look at. Is I'd look to see how niche you are, right? How specific you are, right? there are exceptions to this rule, right? If you're so niche that you're the only person who could do this one thing, right? Maybe, but even then, there's so many things that are outside of your control on the client side that I don't know. So it's something you want to pay attention to is, pay attention to your cash flow and how your clients are paying you and all that stuff. You want to be as diversified as you can.
Yeah, I always try to think of it as try to line up the next piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to segment some of your time for marketing as well as some of your time for development. I mean, unless you're going to outsource it, which I haven't done yet.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Again, I've learned this the hard way, right? In 2001, when the industry tanked overnight, we had 80% of our business tied up with one client.
Yeah.
And we had to restructure fast.
Yeah, I was
and
in
that
an
hurt.
agency where that happened.
It hurt.
Exactly.
And so, I'm just speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add to this?
I think I can understand why as a sole individual that's challenging. I will say, I think it's also challenging in an agency, right? Because I think you get into a certain groove with a certain set of kind of clients and things like that, and those big projects are very enticing, right? It's the fish you can't get, right? Just like the ladies or the gentlemen that you want that you can't have, right? It's the same kind of thing. You're always reaching for it. The challenge, though, is that there's a difference between going hot and heavy and being consistent. Consistency is what makes you money over the long term. And so from a financial perspective, and most of my operations in my career have been financially based, running large financial operations, consistency is key, and making sure what you're talking about is filling your pipeline. It's one of the conversations Steve and I have a lot about is what does Zeke's pipeline look like? But here's the key. It's not just the pipeline about who's the next client in the stage gate, if you will. It's about who are the next 5, 6, or 8 clients. And to your point about marketing, what I have found in just the brief time that's, I've known Steve, is that some of these clients that Steve has been working on, or, from a BD perspective, sometimes he's worked on these for 10 years and nothing's materialized. And then they come back around again for whatever the reason.
It's a long
might be.
sales cycle, 10
It can
years.
be a very long sales cycle, and it can be very short too.
Yeah.
I've seen things like huge projects come, like magically happen, it almost feels like. But I think it's about focusing on the pipeline and kind of setting up for yourself what makes you feel comfortable. Like how do you ensure that there's a continuity to your business, right? So you're not having these extreme up and downs. The only other thing I would advise from a sole proprietorship or somebody who's just freelancing for themselves or just has 1 or maybe 2 employees is if you do have 1 or 2 clients that are making up a majority of your work, you better make sure you've got some good amount of savings. Because if that thing goes under, you're going to want to have some time to refill that pipeline, and the sales cycle can be lengthy. So that's the other way to mitigate if you don't have that ability to be as diversified as maybe Steve is suggesting.
Yeah. And I think this is going to look a little bit differently for everybody, for everybody in the room. But one of the things I just want to reiterate that Sam just said is if you're not diversified, take a little bit more of a focus on business development. Right, that's the time to do it. And Sam already made this point, but don't skimp. You get what you pay for, right? So don't skimp on anything. Don't skimp on what you pay your employees. Don't skimp on outside services like legal or accounting or any sort of consultants. Don't skimp on coffee, right? Don't skimp on payroll, things like that. So all those services, everything, you get what you pay for. And again, I've learned this the hard way. Every time I've tried to cut costs or skimp, it's come back to bite me in the ass. So you do truly get what you pay for. And again, within reason, right? You want to make sure it still fits within your budget, but pay people what they're worth. Pay people what so that you value them. And so don't skimp on services. Lastly, there's a specific role within an organization that I wanna call out. Right, we've got one here, and that's account management. And so here's how I define account management. So Mike is our project manager, right? Mike is in charge of schedule. He's in charge of resources. He's in charge of budget. He's in charge of proposals. He's really in charge of the projects and making sure that the projects are delivered on time and on budget. I mean, if I had to sum up Mike's job, that's what he does on a day-to-day basis. An account manager is really the person that's there to give the client a hug, right? It's all the other stuff that's not related to development or design. And so Katrina, our account manager, is there to help clients input their WordPress content, or change their widgets, or train them on an app that we're developing, right? She's there for all the other stuff, right? And so that role is really important. And even if you're a solopreneur, taking the time to do account management instead of project management will go a long way. Again, it shows that you care, right? It's a service that most other agencies don't provide, but there's a key question that you can insert into your account management process. Whether it's you or a specific account manager can ask this question. Did you know we also do this? So your account manager is also your salesperson. And what they're selling to is your existing clients. So one of the things to keep in mind is your best source of new revenue comes from your existing clients. It doesn't come from new prospects. They're there. They're already hiring you. They already like you. They're already happy with your service. Why not offer them something else that they're not buying from you? So if you don't have an account manager, or if you do have an account manager and they're not asking, did you know type of questions, just insert that into the conversation. Did you know we also do this? Hey, you know what? I noticed that you had this thing on your website. We could do that for you. Did you know we did that? That's all they got to ask. And I promise you, those questions will convert into sales. So account management's a key role, and it's often ignored in most agencies. Lastly, on a personal note, I want to talk about a support system. And we actually have been talking about maybe having a dedicated session to this at WordCamp Orange County. Because the support system is important. What we do running an agency or freelancing or running our own business or being self-employed, it's stressful. This is not for the faint at heart. It's hard. It's not easy not knowing where your next client is going to come from or knowing if you're going to get paid, right? When I got into this business, I got into it as sort of a dare, kind of a dare to other people and a dare to myself, right? I looked at my boss, I said, you know what? I can do that. I can do that even better than he's doing it. That's not true. This is hard. It is really, really hard running your own business. I work, don't tell my clients this, but I work 24 hours a day. There's not a moment that goes by where I'm not thinking about a project that we're working on, business development, a client's needs, a problem, something. I'm always working. And so it's important that you have a support system. And that's going to look different for everybody in this room, right? I found my support system. She's sitting right there, right? On a personal note, I didn't have a support system, right? I was in a bad marriage for many years, right? I got out of it. I'm now in a new marriage, and I can't tell you, looking back on that, how important that is, because I didn't know how crucial that was to my life and ultimately to my business. And since I've built my support system around me, last year we had the best year in business. It was the best year in our 23 years was 2017, the best year we've ever had. And that's not a coincidence. So it is important that you have a sounding board, somebody that you can then bounce things off of, somebody that's gonna build you up while you're going through those stressful moments, because you're going to have stressful moments. So whatever that support system looks like for you, find it and lean on it, because we need it. And so, anyway, that's it. Back to the algorithm. Communication equals profit. And that's it. That's all I got. Any questions? So thank you. Questions, comments? We still got another 15 minutes.
I've got a question for
Sure.
you, because you were talking quite a little bit about pricing and don't underprice the industry and don't underprice yourself and your competition. You know, I've been myself for so long, I really have no idea what other people do. You know.
What other people charge?
Yeah, I have no idea, and they're certainly not going to tell me. Maybe one of my clients will tell me that, like, he had a bad experience, and so now he's with me. But you know,
Why won't
I
they
really
tell you?
have no
Steve shows his
industry
rate card.
pricing.
Why?
Yes.
Why won't they
Steve
tell
shows
you?
his
I
rate
tell
card.
people all the time.
I'll tell you what he's
People
charging.
generally don't like to tell me.
I'll tell you right now. I charge $150 an hour for development.
Uh-huh.
I charge $200 an hour for project management,
Uh-huh.
$225 for design, $125 for QA. That's my rate card. $250 for executive or strategy.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. Yeah, because
And
here's the thing.
I'm sorry. Here's why. And I've talked about this at other WordCamp talks, right? I talk about my rate card because those are my rates. That's it. That's what I put in my proposals. That's what I tell my clients. Those are my rates. That's not the right fit for every client, right? And I like saying those rates, and I like saying them out in public, and I like saying them up front because not every client is the right fit for Zeke. And so those rates might weed out the clients that I don't want just by saying the rate card, and that's okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I think what I was going to say about knowing the pricing of competitors or people in the space, I think it's really important to have a good understanding of what your costs are. That's the other thing that's important, right? What Steve's rates are what they are because he's running an agency with how many employees now? 8 employees, and himself and all these different things. But if you're by yourself or you're running your business as an individual or with 2 people, the overhead cost burden is not the same, right? So what I encourage people to do as it pertains to pricing is understand what it costs your overhead, what any additional costs are that you need to run your business, and then what's an important amount of profit you want to make for every hour. So for example, in my business, I have a certain hourly rate. Now I'm a salaried executive, but I'm a certain hourly rate. So when I actually do projects at the office, sometimes I will think to myself, does this make sense to be spending this amount per hour on this particular project? And if you start thinking about how you are using your time, whether it be account management or marketing within your own business and it's just you, it's important to understand what those costs are. And then what kind of margin you think is acceptable, right? That's the difference. It feels like pricing is something that's hidden. What you don't know about Steve's hourly rate is what his cost burden is and what margin he's making. That you wouldn't share with competitors, right? But there's no reason why not to say this is what my hourly rate is, because that includes all of those elements, and he's weeding out obviously customers that aren't interested in paying at that rate, right?
But I also know that I'm right in the middle, right? There's agencies that are a lot more than 150, and there's agencies that are a lot less, right? And the range I've seen is about 100 to 225 for development. I'm talking about the development rate specifically. So that's about the range that I see for good quality development. But here's the other thing I was going to say. Hang on a second, Jamal. Hang on. I'll get it there. So the other thing I was going to say is come to meetups, and ask people. They'll tell you their rates. It's not a secret.
Well, your success is your rate card is not negotiable.
That's right.
That's why it's not hidden.
That's right.
Somebody who hides gives several different rates to different people.
So let me talk about non-negotiable in a second.
So I'm curious, and again, slightly different perspective of most of my clients are based on marketing budgets as opposed to development.
Mm-hmm.
And invariably the worst clients I've had over the years are the ones who want hourly, like time commitments. They want to know what your hourly rate is and how many hours you're going to put into the project. And the reality is, someone invariably says, just make up some numbers, we don't care, we just need to dot these. But they're almost always the worst clients. So most of the good clients are, all right, this is your budget, and depending upon whether it's paid advertising, SEO, etc., they're charged either consulting, this is your monthly fee for the job that we will do, or it's a percentage of your ad spend, or sometimes something in between. Are most of your projects, is it, all right, it's X number of hours, this is our hourly rate, project's gonna cost you this much? Is that how you bid most of your projects?
So let me tell you how we work. So we onboard clients in a couple of different ways, but the two major ways are either we're building a project from scratch, so we're building phase one, or we're taking over an existing project, meaning we're entering into maintenance, right? So the way we work is phase one is typically a fixed fee, and then maintenance is hourly, typically based on a retainer, a guaranteed number of hours per month. I'll explain our retainers in a minute, right? When we're working on phase one, we will typically, the bottom project we'll consider, if we're working on phase one, is about $75,000. That's about where we start. If we're working on an original website or original app. And that mark alone will weed out a lot of the clients that aren't the right fit for Zeek, right? Typically the differentiator for us is we're building a website that has some sort of a custom element to it. We're also building a website where the website is the business, right? And that's a key differentiator, right? So the websites that we build are either making money or saving money, or it's some particular tool that is an integral part of the business. The website is the business, not there's a business and then they've got a website as some sort of a marketing or a brochure site. Those aren't the kind of sites that we typically build. So that differentiator alone, because we're building something that is custom, raises the price, raises the bar. As far as maintenance goes, the way the retainer works is we're a little bit different than, say, a legal retainer. We do a monthly retainer. So our clients that are on maintenance might say that we want 40 hours a month from you, right? Doesn't mean they're actually going to use 40 hours a month, but they want us available for 40 hours a month, right? Whether they use it or not, we're going to set aside those resources, 40 hours for them to have. Yeah, every week, say if it's 40 hours, it's 10 hours a week you get. We're setting those resources aside. Whether you use them or not, that's your choice. But it doesn't roll over the next month. It's use it or lose it, right? Our retainers are there so that we've got those resources available for you, so that if you have immediate needs, we're there for you. That's how our retainers are structured. Retainer's not right for everybody. Some clients just want to use hours, pay at the end of the month for the hours they incurred. But if they're not retainer clients, they get pushed off, right? They're second to the retainer client, so we're going to fit them into the schedule when it works for us. So that's the difference in the two maintenance contracts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
So with someone for a new business, how good is the question about asking, what's your budget?
Yeah.
How, is it usually a positive way to ask, or do you think it can backfire instead of telling them what you're charging per hour or whatever?
No, I always ask, what's your budget? That's a question I ask right in the first phone call. A lot of clients won't tell you, right? Either because they don't want to tell you, because they think it's a negotiating tactic, or they don't know, right? So they're looking to you for what the budget is. So if they don't know or they won't tell you, I will listen to what their project is, and I'll say, you know what? That's similar to this project that we did, and that project cost X. So does that range sound like it's a good fit for you? That's how I ask that question. So let's talk about non-negotiable, right? So my rates are my rates, right? I don't discount. I don't advise that any of you discount, right? So if somebody comes to me and they say, here's the scope, right? And I say, I think that's $100,000. And I say, whoa, our budget was only $50,000. I say, great, let's break it up into phases. Tell me where you want to cut, right? So let's see where we can cut out half this scope, and then we can meet your $50,000 budget. So the way you get to the lower budget is by cutting out work. Don't discount your rates.
How long did it take you to get to that?
23 years. I just came up with it. It took me a while. I got to tell you, it took me a lot of trial and error to get to the point where I didn't negotiate my rates. But we also have to be, most of our work comes on a referral.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I get the majority of my business. And so because it comes on referral, typically the referrer will have a story about us and has let the client know, hey, we do quality work, we deliver on time, we care, we're somewhat empathetic. We listen. You're going to get all those things when you go to Zeek. So price isn't typically an issue because they know that we are going to be more expensive than some of our competitors, and there's a reason for it.
I think the other thing too that's important, and I think Steve will die when I say this, and that is that discovery is a big part of that process. I don't think that. I don't care for discovery. Every business I've worked at since I've met Steve, he has tried to pawn discovery off on me. He has tried to sell the business I worked for services from Zeek, and
not that it wasn't needed.
We always have a discussion about it. But discovery, and all jokes aside, I just don't want to pay for it is the purpose. But discovery is actually super important, and it is super important because it actually saves you money on the back end. And that, I think the other part of it too is when you're looking at the project life cycle of something, if you can sell the discovery part in the beginning and how that saves the person money or the company money, doing a lot of unnecessary things throughout the phases that follow discovery, then you're in a much better place to adhere to a budget that they've set for you. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
No, I was going to talk about how to sell that, right? So there is a way to sell discovery, right? So let's say there is a client that just doesn't know the budget, right? They don't even know exactly what they're building yet. They've got this idea, they know they kind of know what they want, right? Well, they don't know what they don't know, right? And that's okay. And so the way I go about that is to say, you know what, we can help you, right? I think this is going to require 40 hours of discovery, right? At $250 an hour. That's my discovery rate, or 20 hours of discovery, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but 20 hours of discovery, $250 an hour. At the end of that discovery, I have a deliverable. I'm going to deliver you back a scope of the work, right? That I know so far, right? Or a report or something, right? You're going to have a document that is valuable to you, whether you use Zeek or not, right? You can take this document and you can use another developer if you want, but you will know a lot more at the end of this discovery process than you know right now. We're going to educate you as to how these things work, how you might go about it, what it might cost, right? And so we're going to give you back a report that will, bring you up to speed more than you are now. That's how you sell discovery. Now, the key to discovery, the key to getting the project is when you sell that, write the report so that you're the only agency that can satisfy what you wrote. If I can get in at the pre-RFP phase, right? So one of my tricks is, right? If somebody is thinking about an RFP, a request for a proposal, right? They're thinking about a project. I'll come in and for free, I'll help write the RFP. I'd gladly come in and write the RFP for you, right? Here's why. Because I'm going to write an RFP that only Zeek can satisfy. Make sense? If you can have that conversation, you're coming in, you're building trust, you're offering some free consulting, you say, I have this expertise, right? I can come in, I can write some of those requirements for you. Write the requirements that only you can satisfy.
Pushback you'll have is, oh, we don't need those things.
What?
Pushback you might have is like, we don't need those things.
No problem. We don't need discovery, or we don't need...
We don't need like certain areas that you might have mentioned in the proposal, that what if we take that out, and they try to bring you at the same level as the other.
But there will inevitably be things that they hadn't thought about.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's part of the discovery. So that's part of the discovery process. So you go in and ask questions, say, and you're basically defining the project at that point. That's my discovery process. I'm asking questions so I can define the project, putting myself, basically I'm an agent of the client at that point, right? So I'm on their team asking the right questions so that I can define the project. So that's so that they can hone the features that they want and don't want. That's the discovery process.
And so we do the same thing at the company that I work for. We actually have a RFP pre-filled out, ready to go. If they don't have one, you pass it over to somebody.
Sweet. I love it.
It's a good tactic to work
That's
for.
great. Yeah. And I'm assuming it's an RFP that only you can satisfy.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love it. Remind me not to compete against you. Any other questions? Yeah?
Concerning taxes, actually, so it's rather technical on the business side.
Concerning what?
Taxes.
Taxes. Okay.
So, yeah, it's tax season, and, I just started my, one of my questions is, without speaking to the amount of revenue that I collected for 2017, like, LLC or corporation, which should I go with? So, like, I understand, like, publicly traded company versus, LLC, the single member LLC, which is what I got started with. But that's about it, and so being right now we're just a remote team that all works together that builds solutions. We hopefully will want an agency one day that will have like a brick and mortar and
I may pass this question to Sam because she has more expertise. I'm not an accountant.
Yeah.
Zeke is set up as an S corporation, and we set it up that way based on our accountant's advice at the time.
Oh, so
right?
you're an LLC S corporation?
No, we are an S corporation. We're not an LLC.
Okay.
Right? LLC is a limited liability corporation.
Yeah.
Either way, both are there to protect you from liability, right? So my S corp is there so that, God forbid, we get sued, and this lawsuit is detrimental to the business, right? They're suing the entity. They're suing the S corporation, and I'm personally protected on the other side.
Understand that.
You don't have the exact same protections in an LLC, from what I understand.
Right.
Again, I'm not an accountant, but I'm gonna tax purposes. That's a separate issue. But
So I guess what your question is which way would you suggest setting up a company?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, like the actual entity structuring.
Yeah. That's a complicated question. I will say this. The things that I think are important to recognize about how you set up the company is who is owning it. Who is the ownership? If it is an individual, obviously an S corp would probably be most appropriate. But if you've got multiple partners in a situation, you're probably going to want to do an LLC. But again, it's more about, what is the percentage of ownerships, all the partners. There's a lot of pieces that go into it. The more people that you have, obviously it gets more complicated. But I think it's really about, how you want to set up the entity and how, from a tax perspective, you and your business want to pay taxes. So for example, in an S corp, in our situation, the profits of Zeke, ultimately the taxation is paid through Steve. Steve pays all the taxes individually. Other types of LLCs, the company is responsible for the taxation on the profits, but there's benefits for and against.
Right.
It really is about how you want to handle the profit of the business and the tax payments.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have actually a very good independent attorney that's set up multiple LLCs for me outside of Zeke, and I'm happy to refer you. She's inexpensive, and she can probably tell you exactly what you want to do based on your situation.
That's
So
wonderful.
happy to refer you to her.
Please.
Well, there is one major difference also, the paperwork. In
Oh, yeah.
corporations, you have to have meetings, lots of paperwork, lots of them. LLC
Oh, I would
is
not
much
suggest
more.
being a corporation at all, and to begin, because then you're talking about things like you have to have board of directors meetings. There are very specific requirements there. I would never suggest you start with a corporation. It is definitely going to be an LLC or some other derivative of that. But that's just my
I would talk to this attorney
Yeah.
first. She's going to know
with
better
your
than I do.
specifics.
Yes. Yeah. Corporation has stock. Does an LLC
Yes.
have stock?
No.
Those
And-
percentages of ownership.
Yeah.
LLC's percentage of ownership, S corp actually has stock
Has stock
certificates.
certificates.
Zeke has stock certificates.
And you can grow as you.
If you need to raise
need.
capital, an S corp is really the way to go.
Yes.
Yep.
Because otherwise, you're forming a partnership with an LCC.
Yep.
Right.
If you start as a single owner
Right.
partner.
But the taxes definitely work differently.
Very much
so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
God.
so I'm happy to refer you.
Like one of the questions where you say you don't scam.
What's that?
Yes.
One of the
Don't,
places
yeah.
where you
Don't
scam.
scam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
On this one, you don't want to skimp. You
Yeah.
want good professional advice, and we're
Yes.
not it.
Yes, don't skim. Don't skim.
Yeah.
This
Is anyone familiar with the term holding company?
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, so like, if I had multiple business ideas, like, would that'd be something to be.
Here's the way I do it. I actually have multiple businesses. So
Yeah.
I now have 4, right?
Wonderful.
So I've got Zeke as the S corp, and for the other ones, I just set up LLCs.
Yeah.
So I just for any business that I start, I just set up an
The
LLC.
subsidiaries of the S corp? No.
No, nothing to do with them.
Different entities. Okay.
Yeah.
And remember,
And
there's also other qualifications too with these other businesses. Like, let's say some of the owners are married. There's a bunch of other qualifications associated with that as well. That are all of these things are important. That a very established attorney who can do this for you will go through all of those things, right?
And yeah, and to add what Sam's saying, each LLC is set up a little bit differently because the structure of the corporation, of the entity is different, right? Like Sam said, some of the partners are married, and because we're married, you have to decide what happens to your stake in the LLC should you pass away,
Yeah.
right? Some of the partners say, yes, it goes to my spouse. Some of the partners say, no, it goes back to the
Right.
it goes back to the LLC, right? You have to decide if the spouse then becomes a
Managing
voting
member.
share, a managing member, voting shares or non-voting shares, right? You also need to decide who's whether you have a single member managed LLC, meaning
Which I
one
do
member
have right now.
one member making all the
Single member
decisions,
LLC, yeah.
or well, it's not single member LLC, single member managed LLC,
Managed
right? So that it's deciding who manages, who makes day-to-day decisions, and you also define what the decisions are. So what are day-to-day decisions versus large decisions, right? And it's all spelled out in the LLC agreement. And you want to do that all up front so that there are no misunderstandings down the road when you become wildly successful. So, all right, I think we'll end there. Next month, are we going to talk about
Sure.
valuations?
Yes.
Okay, so next month, we're going to expand this a little bit, and we're going to talk about how you evaluate a company, which is Sam's area of expertise. So we're going to talk about things like EBITDA. And so we're going to talk about the financial side of things. So join us for next month. Anyway, thank you for coming. Next meetup here is Women Who WP on Wednesday, right? And then the general WordPress meetup is here on next Monday. So see you then.
Thank you.